Get ready for truth and transparency from an ocean of liberal tears. Welcome to the Blue Shark Show with your host, Mike Lang.
Eating your own. That's what we're going to talk about today. It'll be the main topic, but that has so many offshoots on it. But here we go. We get all kinds of comments about sometimes Republicans or Democrats, whoever it may be, they eat their own. We're going to go over a few things to show people what the real story is on eating your own. And we're going to start with the Republican Party platform and principles and the Democrat Party principles.
So the Republican Party platform, every 2 years we have the state convention and all the delegates get together and decide what it means to be a Republican. And they put that in a form of the legislative priorities, the principles of being a Republican, and then individual platform planks. And amongst those principles are things like the law of nature is a nature's God, the sanctity of human life from fertilization until natural death, Texas and American sovereignty, limiting powers of the government to the constitutions, both of Texas and the U.S., personal responsibility, things like that. You know, these conservative principles that people like us and a lot of our viewers know, this is what it means to be a Republican.
Right. So it's almost kind of like a measuring device. It's a tool that you use as a Republican to grade fellow Republican elected officials. If they are not standing on the Republican Party values, if they are not upholding the Republican Party platforms, then it's an accountability tool. This is what we measure by. These are what the things that we stand for as Republicans. And if you're going to claim to be a Republican, then it would behoove you to know what it means to be a Republican.
And that's right. And you look at the principles, and there's 12 principles that are based on the over 300 platform planks in the Republican priority platforms. And Nate, I'll add on to what you said, as far as the state convention. We have precinct conventions here in Hood County. We have county conventions, and that moves to the state. So all these platform planks were done by Republicans from the very local level, the precinct level, then to the county level, then to the state level. So if you haven't been involved to see the process, yet you turn around and talk about Republicans eating their own, that's where we have that problem of you better understand what the principles of the party says. Now, we went over what the Republican Party principles are in general. Let's take a look at the Democrat Party.
So when you look at the Democrat Party platform and their principles, some of the issues that they discuss have to do with issues like health care. They believe that health care is a right and that women's rights are human rights, that they owe future generations a clean and healthy planet. Kind of like they believe that health care is a right at the cost of other people. They also believe in equality and freedom. They believe in equal opportunity and freedom for all beings, no matter a person's race, disability, religion, gender, identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic situation, or immigration status. So we see a lot of the immigration issues now where we have immigrants just, lining up at the border and coming across and being bussed in, and they want to have rights for these people to vote when they're not even citizens of our state.
And not just rights to vote, but, $450,000 for the unaccompanied minor if you're separated with your family. And so there's differences in the platforms between the two.
Yeah, and a lot of what the Democrat platform does, they wrap it in all these nice words, but we see through the legislation that they put forth that, while some of it may sound okay, when you get down to it, it's not feasible. Like you said, you've got a situation where we have a border crisis going on, and they want these people, as soon as they get here, to have access to virtually free health care.
Healthcare, voting rights, all kinds of things. I mean, it sounds great on the surface. It sounds like why would anyone be opposed to this? But when you see it actually play out and it's put into practice, this is at the cost of all the taxpayers' backs, and it actually violates our constitutional rights and gives our rights as citizens away to other people that don't belong here.
And you look at the anti-Second Amendment things in here and take a look. Go to Google the Texas Republican Party platform, and the Texas Democrat Party platform and take a look for yourself and read through there. And that way, when you're on social media and you're going back and forth about people eating their own, you see, especially here in Hood County and across the state, but you see that we, conservative Republicans, are following the platform that the Republicans put together by themselves, went through the precinct, county, and state conventions to have all the planks, all the principles. But what we have is we have a fringe that wants to pay attention maybe to 2 or 3 things on the Republican Party platform. Maybe they're independent, maybe they're Democrat. But here's where the divisiveness comes in and what's called hatred comes in. When people on the outside fringe want to change the Republican Party platform and tell the Republican Party that their principles are wrong, and that seems to be the hate and divisiveness, and media picks up on that big time.
Oh yeah, they do. But it's not that they're wrong. You may not agree with them. Maybe you're not really a Republican.
Yeah, and there are 300 or 400 something planks in that Republican Party platform. If you have a major issue with things like election integrity or things like a strong Second Amendment or constitutional state, well, maybe you should run as an independent and not waste the Republicans' time trying to tell Republicans how to be Republicans when we've already decided that, and we do it every 2 years.
And you look at the legislative priorities from each, the Democrat platform and the Republican platform, and the Republicans had 8 on their list. The big one here was taxpayer-funded lobbyists. Mm-hmm. And we actually had a commissioner that put on the agenda to go against that 8th principle, legislative principle of the Republican Party. So that's where your divisiveness comes in. It's on the platform. It's there. When they sign up, they sign the platform, all right? Mm-hmm. So they sign up as a Republican. They're there as a Republican. If you're an elected official or candidate and you run as a Republican, please read the Republican Party platform and the legislative priorities. If you want to go against them, then you are being divisive, and you could even be hating on the Republican Party, and that's where this comes from. That's where all this mess comes from. If you don't like it, be an independent.
Yeah.
Be a Democrat, or at least agree with the party 80% of the time, 20% of the time. Don't fight the party. Change it during the precinct, county, or state conventions.
It's funny to me watching people try to tell Republicans how to be Republicans when a lot of times the ones doing it, A, have never been involved in the precincts, county or state convention process, or B, they're just flat out Democrats, and then we've got the moderates here in the Republican Party that love getting praised by the Democrats who say, oh, you Republicans are being too strong on these issues. You're being too conservative. And they say, oh, yeah, they're right. It's like they enjoy getting that praise. A certain county judge comes to mind when I think about that because, the Democrat chair will be patting him on the back and telling him how great of a job he's doing. And if you're doing that good of a job, maybe it would be the Republican chair telling you that, not the Democrats.
We see this a lot on the local level. We see the people in our messages that people message us, and it's like, here it is on a local level. They have no clue what's going on with the Republican Party, but you get to the federal level and you talk about Biden or Trump, they have it down. Mm-hmm. They want to be fiscal conservatives. They want to be, religious liberties. They want to stand for everything that the platform stands for. But then you get to the local level and all that's out the window because you know why? Oh, I know that person and I want to be liked, so I can't do that.
Yeah, that's where courage comes into play. It's very easy to be conservative and to hold your elected and appointed officials accountable when they're not in the grocery store with you or when you don't see them at the country club little trade show they have for the shopping stuff. When it's right here in your community, it takes a higher level of integrity and a higher level of commitment to get people willing to hold their government accountable.
Maybe that might be hard or difficult for some elected officials to differentiate between the two, being held accountable for your position as an elected official versus being attacked personally. But what I think would help them to understand is, look, you were elected to this position to uphold these principles, and bottom line, that's what accountability looks like.
And it's also interesting, I think, to look at who can make their arguments for or against a candidate or elected official based on policy position and not based on personal things. It's very easy to say, oh, well, this person's just a jerk, or bring up some sort of accusation against somebody, when at the end of the day, you can't take them on when it comes down to policies and positions. And we really only get that from one side. It's basically the moderate side, the side that has no clue about the Republican Party. And they know that they can't win on the issues, so they like to use personal attacks.
That's where we get this divisiveness from, this hatred from, is we get that outside fringe of moderates trying to tell people about what a Republican should be, when in fact what they say is more along the Democrat Party lines and the Republican lines. But then they'll turn around on Facebook and say, hey, I'm pro-Trump, I'm pro this. And it doesn't quite connect. So we've got to, that's where we always say it's local, 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 where your government is, because it's very easy to be a keyboard warrior on Facebook and go out there and pretend that you're so conservative on a federal level, and then it's all out the window on the local level. Let's look at a couple messages that we've received. And it talks about the progressive Democrats, of course, tax and spend on the federal level. And it says, but now we have no hope in Republicans having enough backbone to stand and fight for us and try to rein in spending. And we have a Republican, that says, we don't have any officials to stand and fight for us, somebody with a backbone. And this is another keyboard warrior that on the federal level, they want somebody to fight for fiscal responsibility. But on the local level, you don't hear a word, not one word.
Yeah, and when you do have someone here at the local level, and we are fortunate to have several here at the local level with a backbone that have proven that they will stand and fight, they get bastardized by the local media, by the moderates, and of course by the local Democrats that are about 20% of this county.
Yeah, and sometimes even the national media. I mean, we've seen that with a couple different issues here in Hood County. Little old Hood County making national news because we're holding our elected officials and appointed officials accountable. If you do not stand for certain principles as this elected official or this appointed official that you were put in that position by our Republican elected officials, then yes, we're going to hold you accountable to those issues, to the policy issues that you may or may not be implementing or that you want to change. And then when you see the national news come in here to Hood County, yeah, we need people with a backbone.
We do. We saw that in 2015 with the religious liberties issue. We had one person stand, and she stood for our religious liberties. She stood for the Texas Constitution, the Bible, and yet she was just eviscerated by the county judge at the time and the commissioner court at the time, except for Jeff Tout. Jeff Tout did an outstanding job during that period. But all the other commissioners and judge, they ran for the hills. They wanted nothing to do with it. And that's the kind of backbone that this county and country need. And you can talk about backbone all you want on a federal level, but local is where it is at. When you have elected officials on a county level here in Hood County being praised by CNN, NPR, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, and even Hillary Clinton, there is something wrong, and that is not a conservative Republican individual.
Part of taking a stand as a conservative, especially a principled conservative, is you're going to be hated for it. And you're going to receive death threats, and you're going to receive hate mail, and you're going to have people feel like they can talk to you any old type of way. And when you're looking at someone who's, a candidate or someone that's an elected official, you have to ask, do they have the stomach for this?
Yeah, because it's definitely going to come when you, like you said, when you take a stand for something, you shine that light and you're going to attract attention. And people aren't necessarily going to agree with you on some of those issues, and they're going to make that known. But it's funny, too, because the side that's usually doing the attacking is also the side that's preaching about being compassionate and, can't we all just get along? And where's your compassion for your brother or sister in Christ? Well, sorry, we were called to take a stand. We were called to be that salt and that light of this earth, and those attacks are going to come. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to see that compassion. And when you hold your elected officials accountable, that isn't having a lack of compassion. That's just doing your job as a voter because you voted for this person and you're holding them accountable. I think a lot of people get that. That's a gray area, and a lot of people confuse that, holding someone accountable and then having a lack of compassion. It's not the same thing.
And when you stand up for religious liberties, that's when you really start getting the hate mail. When you stand up for biblical principles, that's when you start getting the hate mail. So, Courtney, when you talk about compassionate, you can be a compassionate person. But when you see the two words together, compassionate conservative or compassionate Republican, I'm here to unite the party. Well, we have our principles in the party. All right. There's compassion in those principles. There's values, there's morals, there's biblical principles in that platform. And if you're here to unite and not divide, hey, great for you. But when you take a stance on biblical principles, you will be called a hater and a divisive person, and you're going to have to take a stand. So when I hear these candidates talk about compassionate Republican, I'm here for unity, the other side is not going to let you do that without calling you a hated bigot. And just look at the Hood County News. And they will do it right and left all the time to try and destroy a good person's character.
And it's funny hearing people say they're here to unite the Republican Party. The Republican Party unites once every 2 years at a state convention, and that's where we decide what it means to be a Republican. It's funny you mentioned the Hood County News. They changed ownership here recently, and they kept calling themselves the new Hood County News, and that they weren't going to go back to the old practices of the past. And if we've seen anything through the special election, the special runoff, and then these November elections, and now as we're rolling into the primary, that mask has come off completely. They've gone back to doing personal character assassinations on a few people already, and they already have their chosen candidates for a couple of the positions coming up in the Republican primary.
And what we find in Hood County, everybody says we're about 80% conservative, 20% liberal. I would say the numbers are higher than that, but what we find is the Democrat, socialist, Beto-loving, Hillary Clinton-loving people, anti-Christian, will vote for the least conservative Republican in every race, which is 20%, maybe up to 30% now. The Hood County News is going to support the most furthest left Republican, so-called Republican there is. They've done it throughout the years. They're going to continue to do that. So when you see them supporting somebody, bank on that.
Yeah, make no mistake about it. It is strategic. That it's almost brilliant. Not to give them credit, but it is strategic. And I saw this happen out in California when I lived there all the time. It's planned out. They get into these primaries, and that is how they turn or flip city by city, state by state.
And Kathy Cruz does a great job at firing off articles prior to. Go back about 2 or 3 months and start looking at some of the articles of the elected officials that she goes after. And those are going to be your most conservative, Christian, principled people, because they do not want those people in. They have a different agenda than most of us here in Hood County.
It's funny watching the discourse in and around local politics. You have the liberal wing of the Republican Party say, well, can't we all just get along? Can't we all just get along? We're all Republicans, right? Well, we do all get along. We all pretty much agree on the Republican Party platform and principles, and it's the people that go against that right out in public in front of everybody, like Commissioner Cotton did with the pro-taxpayer funded lobbying resolution. If you want to do something like that, that's fine. Don't try to call yourself a Republican when you're taking actions right in front of God and everybody that fly in the face of the Republican Party. We can't have that. What's the point of having a Republican Party if we're not going to follow the platform? Kind of like what's the point of having election laws if we're not going to enforce them? Here in Hood County, we're basically a Texas election code sanctuary in that none of our Texas election code laws are being enforced either by law enforcement, the county attorney, or the district attorney. Everyone wants to punt the ball over to the Texas Ethics Commission or the AG that both, frankly, have bigger fish to fry. Meanwhile, we have 2 city councilmen that are guilty, flat out. They signed an affidavit swearing their guilt of 16 combined Class A misdemeanors. They will never pay for that.
So when you call out an elected official on something that they're doing that doesn't align with the Republican Party values, as a Republican, we have to take that accountability into consideration at every level. Just like we see people talking about the federal legislation, the federal government, congressmen, Senate leaders, we don't have an issue calling them out when they are doing something that we're not okay with. We have to take that same mentality, that same accountability, and bring it down to the local level. Without that same accountability measure in place locally, we've lost it. And it doesn't matter, quite frankly, because it all starts here at the local level.
What I have a respect for is I have a respect for a person that says, hey, I'm a Democrat. I believe in these principles. I believe in the Democrat Party platform. I respect you for that. I also respect the Republican that says, look, I'm for the principles. I'm for our God-given rights. I am for the platform and the legislative priorities. What I don't respect is somebody that's lukewarm and is going to try to be on the fringe of either party and say, hey, you're not doing it right, when they have no idea what the platform or the principles are because they haven't even bothered to read them. If you read the Republican Party platform and principles, they go by the Texas Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. And you make an oath when you're elected that you will follow those. And if you can't follow those as a Republican, then frankly, I don't want you. Shark Show out.